From WHQR Public Media, this is the Newsroom. I'm Ben Schachtman. Thanks for joining us. On today's show, we're sitting down with Leila Fadel, host of NPR's Morning Edition and the Up First podcast. A Lebanese American who was raised in Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, Fadel grew up immersed in the political and cultural shifts of the Middle East, but often saw her life reflected as a two-dimensional caricature in Western news media. So when she went into journalism, she focused on human stories to bring depth and nuance to the conflicts she covered. And that served her well both as a journalist and a host. Fadel came to Wilmington to speak at our annual luncheon in May and delivered a talk that was both charming and funny, but also at times deadly serious. Later on this episode, you'll hear that speech in its entirety, plus a lively Q&A we did with the audience. The morning of the luncheon, she sat down for breakfast with the WHQR news team. That's despite having been at a fundraising cocktail party the night before and remotely hosting Morning Edition earlier that day in the pre-dawn hours. So we would have forgiven her for being jet-lagged, but she was bright-eyed and ready to go. And over coffee, we jumped right into a conversation about her work at NPR, our work here in Wilmington, the stories we're all working on, and, most importantly to all of us, the current state of journalism and its fate. It was a great conversation, and I think part of that was because, as avid listeners, she's already been a part of our morning lives for so long. It felt more like catching up with a friend than sharing a meal with one of NPR's true rock stars. And since we had an hour to spare before the luncheon, Fadel agreed happily to a sit-down interview. My hope was that we could capture some of the spirit of that breakfast conversation, maybe minus a few colorful adjectives, on tape so we could share it with you. All right. Well, Leila Fadel, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
So you're in town for WHQR's luncheon, and we'll have excerpts from the speech you're going to make, but almost selfishly, I wanted to ask you some nerdier journalist questions.
Yeah.
For our inside baseball sausage-making fans. First, can you just give people a sense, and we were talking a little bit about this off mics, but what does your role look like in the morning when you're hosting Morning Edition, and how do you fit into the mix of what's going on during Morning Edition and story selection and the tone and the pacing and all that good stuff?
My job is really to be the curator, right? This is a show that showcases our incredible correspondents around the world and around the country, from our station reporters to our full-time staff, station reporters that contribute to our work. And that 2-hour show, hopefully, gives you a sense of what's happening in politics, in culture, in art, gives you fun moments, gives you serious moments. I think we can feel really heavy these days because I think the world is pretty heavy, and that's reflective of the reality. And so my job is to have conversations, and I see myself as a stand-in for the public. What questions do you have as an American to your senators, to your representatives, to your president, to your secretary of state? What questions do you have to foreign leaders? What questions do you have for a survivor of a tornado, for a starving person in Gaza, in Sudan, for a person who survived the October 7th attacks? What questions do you have? And that's my job, is to bring those answers to you if I can. And if they say yes to coming on doing the interview.
Well, right, yeah. I want to grab that thread and pull it out a little bit because over the last 4 years, we've heard a lot of concern and complaints from our more conservative listeners that NPR maybe doesn't bring as many conservative voices into the mix, into the conversation. I can say personally at the local level, we've heard those complaints. And sometimes it's that we didn't do a good enough job at soliciting to get those voices on the show. But sometimes there's just kind of a wall that we hit, we couldn't get those voices to join us. And it diminishes our reporting, but it's, we've gone as far as we can go. So is this something that you guys are dealing with?
Yeah. I think, I think about this a lot because it's our job, not just ideologically, whether you consider yourself conservative or progressive or leftist or right or libertarian or, independent, or I'll pick a stripe. But just generally, lived experience, socioeconomic status, background, age, gender, all of those things. We have to, as public media, represent the country and get those voices on air. Sometimes I think we might miss it. We might not realize we didn't hear from this kind of really important segment of society in this moment. How do we do better next time? Sometimes people won't come on. We worked, this isn't a conservative thing, but we asked President Joe Biden to come on for 4 years. He never gave us an interview. And that says something about the administration if you won't produce the president to the press. And he did very, very few interviews in that entire time. We did often have the Secretary of State, less so the Secretary of Defense, but we were able to get top administration officials to come on our air and talk to us. That has been very difficult with this new administration. We've been able to get Republican lawmakers come on our air. My co-host Steve Inskeep spoke to Mike Waltz a lot before he went into the administration. He's now out again. And I don't know why that is. I mean, we've gotten a lot of declines, and so we let the listeners know. We invited this person to come on. They didn't make themselves available. But they're not the only voices, and so we work really hard to get. If we did a free speech series recently on the First Amendment and about who feels more free to speak in this moment and who feels less free. And we really work to bring on both experts and regular people and advocates and activists who had really different perspectives on that. And I think it worked out really well because of that, because there are people who felt worried about getting canceled for 4 years, and so they didn't say certain things. And then now we have a lot of people who are worried not just about getting canceled, but maybe getting detained over things they say. And so that all came across. So I think it's our job to try to reflect everybody. But if you won't come and speak to us, we can't reflect you. So I would just urge you to listen and hear that we're fair and come on the air.
Yeah, you mentioned the First Amendment series, which you guys have been running on Morning Edition, which I really appreciated because it felt like a good time and a way to sort of step back and kind of take stock of where we are in terms of freedom of speech. Because it kind of gets lost in the news cycle churn sometimes. So where did the idea for this project come from?
I think it was kind of just, first of all, it was a mantra of this administration. It came in on a promise to restore free speech. There were a lot of conservatives who felt like, man, I'm getting kicked off Facebook and I'm getting kicked off Twitter for the things that I say under, the social media companies saying, we're going to start fact checking, we're going to start content moderating, which I think, there's this whole area of the public square of like, what is hate speech and what is free speech, right? What is disinformation and what is information that is good for society? And so then with this administration, there's this promise to restore that. Everybody gets to feel free, but a whole segment of society that started to feel like, wait, my First Amendment right is being violated now. You saw students being arrested, their visas revoked, their lawyers arguing this is all just because of what they think, not what they've done. And so we just wanted to examine what that looked like in the sciences, in the arts, in college, in schools. And we brought on both the voices that had felt muzzled before and feel freer now, and those who didn't. And I found what was interesting, that there was some common ground between sort of across the spectrum when it came to the First Amendment and the idea of what should be protected. And so we spoke to two free speech sort of advocates who are very, very different. One saw Biden as the biggest offender of going after the First Amendment, and the other saw Trump as the biggest threat, President Trump as the biggest threat. But both of them sort of agreed when it came to what was happening with students that we were in this danger zone as a country. And they sort of laid out why and what it means. I mean, because I think what I learned, and what I don't know if other people learned that same lesson, is free speech is a really hard thing to protect. It's really uncomfortable, especially offensive language, especially things that make you feel like, oh my gosh, you're like threatening my reality as a person, as a human. You're offending who I am. But unless that's physically harming and encroaching on your rights, that is protected. And that's really, really a hard thing to keep protecting, because it can feel dangerous sometimes. And one of the experts we spoke to has said, the antidote to disinformation and bad speech is information and good speech, not squashing. And so I think it was just something I wanted to understand better and thought-provoking, and it's central to journalism. Like, free speech and the First Amendment is what allows us to have a thriving independent press, and I've worked in a lot of places that don't have that.
Yeah, I was going to suggest the example of the AP getting kicked from the press room for refusing to call it the Gulf of America.
Gulf of America. I mean, again, this is an administration that wielded its power to say, you must conform with speech I have told you to say. And the AP says, well, I serve the world, and not everybody calls it Gulf of America, and we're not going to do it either. And they sued, and I think they won access back. But those are really significant and I think alarming steps that are happening within this landscape of what a free press in America is.
I mean, talking about journalism, you were giving the classic example of, someone tells you it's sunny outside. It's not your job to report. Oh, person A said it's sunny. Person B said it's cloudy. You yourself must stick your head out the window and say, tell the people, hey,
it's sunny.
It's sunny. Or it's not.
And sometimes that's a very simplified example, right? Like sometimes it can be hard to tell, is it raining or is it sunny, especially if somebody has limited your access to the area.
Yes. Or I mean, one of the things I still hear about, in fact, I've heard the Trump administration called the COVID presidency because so many people reacted to the suppression of certain narratives on social media. And at the same time, you had the parental rights movement, Moms for Liberty, stuff like that, where moms felt like they were being, compared to Nazis in cases where they felt like they had legitimate concerns. And as journalists, sticking our head out the window and seeing if it was sunny or not became very difficult, either because it was complicated issues of, parental rights versus the public's rights, or when it came to COVID, epidemiological issues that we're not experts in.
No. Yeah. It's actually interesting because we explored all those things in the First Amendment series, right? Like we went back to the COVID era for the sciences because, there was this open letter where hundreds of the top scientists in this country basically said science is in danger, is being censored by this administration, and here's how, and we're sounding the alarm. That's what they're saying. It was under attack. But we also went back to a scientist at MIT who very early on in the COVID pandemic said, we need to be open to all theories on how COVID spread, both an accidental lab leak or natural. And because she said this is what she was saying to us in the interview, the scientific community really reacted harshly. So she said, I was free to speak, I was free to say these things, but people were actively trying to get me fired. They were calling me a race traitor. They were going after my scientific background
because she was
Asian American. Yeah. I think she's Canadian, but she might also be American. But because she was ethnically Asian, people were like, "Oh, you're just a race traitor. This is racist. This is stupid." And she was very viciously attacked. And as things change, this is still such a charged subject. And I'm not a scientist or an epidemiologist. And still today, you have government agencies who've now come around to believe that an accidental lab leak is possible, and others who still find that is unlikely. And so I still don't know the origins. A lot of the world doesn't know the origins, but it became this charged environment of like what can and cannot be said and what is okay and what is not okay. And so this scientist says she feels like a lot of the backlash against the scientific community came from that moment and that was a frustrating time for a lot of people, whether you agreed with the mandates or not. They continually were changing. The public didn't understand it. The scientific community was trying to understand it and give information to the public. And that was turning into frustration and actual threats against these public health officials. So like you said, it's so hard to go out the window and be like, this person's right and that person's wrong. But what we do is report on everything that's going on around and how it's impacting people and why it's impacting people and what we do know. And also go back and have a reckoning if we were wrong. And so I think that's really important. But around that, there is also an interest in actively going after the press because we can be a pain for people in power. Like our job is to be a pain, right? Like we're supposed to look at the public records, make sure taxpayer dollars are being spent fairly, make sure laws are being followed, do prisons come up to standard? What are immigration detention centers like? Do the things so that the American public can make decisions for themselves, however they feel. And that can feel bad for people in power who don't want these things coming to light. And what's the easiest way to deal with that? Attack the messenger, go after the journalist instead of dealing with the consequences of what's being exposed. And so I think there is a nefariousness of like, they're fake press and they're biased and they're enemies of the state, instead of dealing with the facts at hand. I
think that's one of the things I hear from folks is that they are from folks in power who do not like our reporting. Whether that's NPR or locally. It is often not that it is.
And that's not always the same. Like we get that from all kinds of people. You know, the Dems were very mad about my reporting going into the election because it didn't find that the public was feeling the way they thought they should be feeling.
Right. But that's how they were feeling.
That's how they were feeling.
I do sometimes think that administrations and elected officials are complaining about how the reporting makes them feel and not the quality of the reporting.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes those same administrations and elected officials then need the press. When they feel like they are on the right side of an issue, which gives me some comfort because the people still need the press.
I mean, I do like when everyone on all sides is like, you're not, then I feel like we're fair. If everyone feels we're unfair,
if everyone's
being pretty
mad,
good. You're good. But yeah, I think depending on where you are on the issue, I often talk about how you might not like something you're hearing because it doesn't confirm your worldview. Or maybe you are not on the same issue of the mom who has an issue with whatever's happening at the public school, right? And so you find that person threatening and awful and whatever. But these are all parts of the society that we live in. And just because you don't want to hear them doesn't mean these ideas and these conversations are being had. So we have to air them. And that can feel bad for someone who doesn't like the idea being aired. This is not to say that I'm going to take settled science and fully question it and be like, climate change is not real. Like, I don't think that's our job. But our job is to really represent all points of views, put them in context, bring the facts of what's been happening around it, why people are concerned. And then the American public is armed with the information they need to make their own decision on what they think about the situation. It's not our job to tell you how to think.
Here's my question for you and how you think about this. It is very easy for people now to look back and criticize reporting or science or public policy on the COVID pandemic. Should we have let people out on the beaches? Probably. Did we know that at the time? No.
Right. And also the press wasn't making those decisions. We were reporting on the decisions being made and how people were reacting to them.
Exactly. I think the critique is that we were...
I mean, there was a period where it was like, don't mask, but no, do mask. Then the rules just kept changing.
We were allowed into breweries, but not bars.
Oh, yeah.
It's very strange. But I think, setting aside the people who want to armchair quarterback what happened for 4 years, I think it is much harder, and I don't know if people realize this, it's much harder to be in a newsroom and figure out in the moment
what's happening
and what is reasonable to include in the conversation. So right now we have a deranged social media algorithm that kind of levels the playing field. So an opinion that represents a fraction of a percent of the population can be as loud as something the vast majority of sort of centrist people feels. So from your chair, how do you say, like, how far into the weeds do you go? I mean,
it's only a 2-hour show, and each segment's only 4 to 7 minutes.
And that's what I mean is that, in a perfect world, sure, you could include every voice proportionally, but that's not how it works. You only have a limited amount of time.
So the thing is I think you have to think about our coverage holistic. People don't listen this way, right? Like, they don't listen this way. And like you said, a lot of the times people are clicking on things that are in their algorithm online versus going to the, to the NPR website or going to our station and just listening, right? So depending on how you do this. But I think we have to think about our coverage holistically. Not every story and not every conversation is going to be everything. It is going to be a perspective. It is going to be as whole as it can be for what it is. But that is part of a larger look. And I think you can accuse us of anything because we pretty much have everything. And so if you want to curate evidence that we're biased, because our conversations are so wide-ranging, you can find pretty much anything. You can, I don't know if I'm making this clear, but what I mean is if you want to give people a false understanding of what we do, because we have such a breadth of coverage and conversations, you can be like, look, they're biased on Ukraine, and let me pull 5 stories that confirm my bias versus the reality of what the coverage looked like. And I think that's where you can be really unfair to the actual coverage. And what I hope people understand is 4 minutes is only 4 minutes of hours and hours of programming. And our correspondents work so hard to really give you all sides of an issue. Not in every story, but in their coverage holistically. And there are certain stories that are more scrutinized than others. There are certain issues that draw more emotion than others. And we all know that. But we have to cover things without fear or favor, whether it's uncomfortable, dangerous, whether we're being ignored or listened to. Our job is to stick to that. And our job is also not to be an advocate to change or shift policy. Our job is just to show you what's happening, show you the impact, share the facts with you, and you as an American get to decide because you live in a country where you can vote.
I want to shift gears a little bit and ask about the NPR-ness of it all.
The NPR-ness of it all?
Yeah. So, again, we were talking about this off mics, but there are times when Morning Edition or All Things Considered will deal with some heavy stuff.
Yeah.
War, famine, poverty, bigotry. And then we'll do a deep dive on a very particular type of bird in one corner of the country.
True.
And I think
we had a bonsai tree birthday the other day.
That's right. So this is not a political partisan critique, but it is just, I feel like it is uniquely NPR-ish where you have those moments where even NPR fans are like, that is very NPR.
It's true, and it's kind of why I love us. Like, I think people need to take a breath. People need a little bit of an escape. Sometimes you need a moment of zen. And so I think those are built in to the show because maybe, NPR kind of started with this quirkiness and continues with this quirkiness. And so I think we do need to do the heavy and light and the weird and the fun and the strange so that people will come back. I think it can be very hard and heavy to be an informed citizen. Right? To really think about what's happening at my school board, what's happening at my city council, what's happening at the federal level, what's happening in the world. How do I make these decisions about the way I want to walk in the world as a citizen? Those are really, it's probably easier just to ignore it all, right? But it will be harder for you in the long run if those decisions come to haunt you at home. And so I think listening to the news, reading the news, consuming the news can feel really heavy. And I think it's okay to just insert some lightness and be a little weird about it.
I appreciate that NPR can be its real self sometimes and just be a little...
We're just out there being ourselves.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about a lot in our newsroom, and I'm sure you guys think about this too, is the last couple generations that are like diehard radio NPR listeners are getting a little long in the tooth. I'm getting a little long in the tooth, to be honest.
We're young. I don't know what you're talking about.
I appreciate it. I'll take that. But... certainly there are generations queuing up behind us who are not all-day radio listeners, who are very a la carte, who get their news and their entertainment and pretty much everything else whenever they want it on demand through a whole variety of different platforms. And they're not particularly loyal, in terms of where, they'll switch from Instagram to Facebook to whatever the next app is.
Right.
They'll get their news from whatever paywall they haven't exhausted yet. And what does NPR look like to that generation that aren't the folks who wake up with you and put it on and listen?
Well, they better just wake up with me.
And listen all the way through the day. What does that look like for someone who's 25 right now?
Yeah. This is a hard question. I think it's what we're grappling with as an industry writ large, right? Like, people don't read the traditional newspaper anymore. They don't necessarily even listen to terrestrial radio at all. And so I don't think there's much we need to change about what we're doing journalistically, but we have to change how we think about getting it to the places where they find us, where they listen to us. Because young people still want to listen. They listen to these hours-long podcasts. Everybody's like, oh, nobody has an attention span, but all these 3-hour long.
Joe Rogan can go for half a day.
Yeah. And Alex Cooper, these are not short podcasts. No. And they're popular. And so it's not that they don't listen. It's that we have to capture their attention, and this space is saturated. At Morning Edition, we have Up First, which is really popular with a younger audience. And I think there's this idea like if we do this exact right story, we're going to draw in this age demographic or this, group of people from wherever in the United States. No, people kind of just want to be informed. And so if you get the news to them in a way that they're like, this is quick and they'll listen. And the numbers show that, right? It's younger, it's more demographically diverse. And again, it's not because we're doing audio for a different audience. It's just that it's being delivered to them in a different way. And it came around at the time that people were suddenly interested in audio again. But these are questions that are way above my pay grade, right? Like, I don't know. I think we just have to figure out where the next space lives, where they're going to click on. Because what I also notice is people really want to discuss the news and all. But to do the news, you have to go to the places, you have to interview the people, you have to read the documents, you have to FOIA the documents. This takes time, energy, and money. And so even the people who are discussing the news and criticizing the media and blah, 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 they are using the primary sources of the people who went to the places and interviewed the people. Maybe they don't like the way it was framed or the way it was written or the way it was, but ultimately the primary sources are the same. And I think we need a more media literate society. Like, we need to think about and teach about media literacy. What are the primary sources? How many sources are there? Where did they get their information? Were they there? Are they just pontificating? Because it's very easy, like you said, to just broadcast whatever, wherever. We do have a set of rules that we live by. Everybody has different standards and ethics in different newsrooms, but generally live by about when it comes to fairness, the right of response, not defaming, who is a public figure, who is not, how do we interview people who are living through trauma. Like, that we think about all of these things. But one person with a microphone can have that same level of audience and has none of those rules and none of that process. And I think we just need to be like radically transparent about how we do what we do. Because people just like honesty. That's all.
I think that is the number one issue we run into when we get criticism, is that it is coming from a place where folks would either like us to do something that is more like a freewheeling podcast where we can just say stuff that we can't back up, or
which we don't do,
which we don't do, or it comes from a place where they don't understand why we can't just produce a story on an issue that they're concerned about, because because they don't understand what the work is. That a FOIA request might take a year, and
that can even be frustrating for the sources and the stories. Like, sometimes you'll start a project or a story, and it will take however long it takes to get everything you need to put it out there. Yeah,
I talked to you 6 months ago. Where's the story?
Yes.
Exactly, Yeah, I think, again, this is way above my pay grade, probably yours, but a new regime of media literacy in high school would be great.
I really do think it's important to teach people, because it's almost like we're being assaulted with noise all the time. And it's a lot of work to sift through. And it's harder and harder to tell what's real and what's not real because of AI and deepfake videos. And, I sit even on my own family chat, and sometimes my dad will send a video and I'm like, no, Dad, Oprah didn't say this. This is like her lips aren't moving at the same rate, or, but it's stuff that's out there, and it's easy for people to fall prey to disinformation or misinformation. And it can have dire consequences, right? Like when you think about the Rohingya, who dealt with a massacre of their community and mass displacement, a lot of that stemmed from disinformation on Facebook that dehumanized, touted these conspiracy theories, and ultimately in the real world, offline, they paid the price for that dehumanization, right? And that is something in the press we're not going to do, right? We're not going to sit and dehumanize, and hopefully we're doing our jobs right. But it also has these incredible powers. Like when I covered the wave of uprisings in the Middle East where people were trying to overthrow their governments, the reason people got out in the streets and had portions of the truth was also Facebook, right? Like there was a young man who was beaten to death by Egyptian police. The police tried to say he had a drug overdose. And that picture was showed online, and people said, that looks like my son. That could be my son. And the country erupted. It's the week of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the 5-year anniversary. what sparked an uprising around the world around police reform and race and racism. It was a video shot by a 17-year-old girl with a police officer's knee on a man's neck as he called for his mom. And that sparked a reaction. It sparked some change. It sparked a major backlash now. All of that stuff happened. But that information made people move and change. But if the information is false and people move and change, what does it do?
That's a good point. Yeah, I think the double-edged sword of social media.
Really? It's incredible to be able to have a real voice when you've been silenced or felt like you've been silenced. But it also means that some pretty nefarious actors get a voice too. I mean, if you think about ISIS and its power, it came from heavily produced online videos telling young men, come, you can have a bunch of wives and you can be a warrior and you can do violence and all this, like video game-esque that was attracting young men from around the world to go do terrible things. And they were translating that stuff into like a bunch of different languages. And the internet is the place they could do that. And so that's where this question of like, what is free speech and what is hate speech? What is inciting violence? What is not? What is the First Amendment in a place that free speech is protected? And what should we moderate and fact check? And when does that become silencing and infringement of free speech? These are hard questions.
I will say, we hear a lot of concern about journalism and the fate of journalism and the Fourth Estate writ large and what we are all to do about it. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like there are some folks who are, trying to write the perfect story and release it in the perfect format at the perfect time. It reminds me of like trendy New York restaurants that are trying to get this summer's dish right on the bleeding edge of that cultural moment. And then there are restaurants that just do a really damn good steak.
They just do.
Or it's really good Lebanese food.
Are we the damn good steak restaurant?
I would like to think we are the damn good steak restaurant or the damn good falafel restaurant or the damn good they do what they do.
That's the perfect ramen.
Yeah, every time. And that's what they do and that's what they're known for, and they don't care what the trend this year is. They know that people need good soup on a cold day sometimes.
Yes.
And what I hear from folks at NPR is that is by and large the plan.
Yeah, and I think we are still, the polling shows that we are still one of the most, if not the most trusted news source in the country, right? We are not a place where a bunch of pundits come on to yell at each other. We are not all heat and no light, right? We are doing journalism. We are having conversations. Sometimes we're going to have a full conversation with a person you hate and you don't like and you don't want to hear from, but that's not going to stop us. And probably the next day we're going to have a full conversation with somebody you love and agree with everything they say, and that's not going to stop us. I feel like we just have to do the work. Like I wish I had all the solutions because I am worried about the future of media, not just because I'm a journalist, but because I know what a place looks like when they don't have a thriving independent press. And it creates a space for nefarious actors to become the only truth tellers who don't tell the truth, and you manipulate a population, and nobody is out there to say, this is what we found. I know he's or she or they are saying this, but this is what we found. Here's the information, public. And so, it is in my interest as both a journalist and a citizen that a free, independent, fact-based press continues to be respected and thrives. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I think people should work to protect that so that you can live in a place that has accountability.
I find that when I meet people who have come to this country from places without a free press, it is one of the things they are most passionately in favor of.
Yeah. Those freedoms, for people who lived in places without those freedoms, I think it's one of the things, like being able to freely assemble, freely practice your religion, freely say what you think. Those are very, very dear rights that a lot of places don't have. And so if those shift and change, and again, that's something we really examined during the free speech series. The other interesting thing is a lot of people will want the free speech for themselves and the things they think, but not the free speech for the other people and the things they think. And people don't even seem to necessarily recognize that that's what they're saying and doing, where it's like, well, that person went too far. And it's like, well...
I find I refer people to the ACLU's page, Defending Speech We Hate.
Yeah.
which makes an excellent case for why a group of ostensibly somewhat liberal folks would defend the Ku Klux Klan or the American Nazi Party. And I am always very grateful when people on one or the other side of an ideological disagreement basically say the most important thing, which is that I disagree with you, but I will fight to the death for your right to say what you said.
Say it. Yeah. I mean, I remember in Egypt, this is a totally different context, but they had overthrown their autocratic leader, and that unifying factor, which was his leadership, was gone. And everybody was arguing about, like, what should Egypt look like? And what is a democracy? And who deserves... And you watch these ostensibly very liberal democratic forces become quite illiberal as soon as a segment of the society they didn't agree with and didn't like started to become more powerful, which were the Islamists, political Islamists. And you watch them side with the army and the institutions over this group, and then everyone kind of had their rights suppressed. So watching the way societies work and how they think about freedoms and what type of freedoms are important and what you're willing to give up if you feel threatened is really fascinating. And it's also where a lot of radical change, good or bad, happens.
I agree with you that it's fascinating. It's also a bit harrowing when it's your own country.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Leila Fadel, thank you so much for your time. I know that you've got a busy day and we got to get you on to your next station here. But before we go, one thing about Morning Edition you think people don't know and should know.
I think they need to know. You hear, so we're there, my co-host and I get up early and we do all this stuff, but behind the four of us is an incredibly large team of hardworking journalists who are fact-checking and prepping and booking guests and finding stories. And all of those people, you don't get to hear them every day, but their fingerprints are all over every conversation that has moved you, that has touched you, that has made you think differently or made you yell at the radio because you're like, yeah, that is the question that needs to be asked. And so I think people need to know that there are a lot of people doing this work so that we can get it right.
God bless the fact checkers.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was our conversation with NPR's Leila Fadel, recorded here at the WHQR studio. But we also wanted to share the talk she gave at WHQR's annual luncheon. And this was recorded on Thursday, May 22nd at the Hotel Ballast in downtown Wilmington.
Hi. So I'm used to sitting in a dark room studio by myself speaking to millions of people I don't see, so this is a little different for me. I spent the morning at WHQR, and it just reminded me why I love working for NPR, because we have a reach in this country that nobody else has. We cover the country, we cover the world, and we cover your community. And just listening to the stories they're working on, it just reminded me how proud I am to be part of this network. And I hope that we're doing this for many years to come and the threat we're under passes. I also kind of want to move here because it's like hospitality and the beach. Post Morning Edition from Wilmington. I was thinking about how I wanted to start today. And last night when I was meeting with some of you who are in the audience today, somebody walked up to me and asked me, as a journalist, if a bus is going off a cliff, do I watch the bus go off the cliff, or do I stop it? Or do I just report on it? Now, I know when things feel unstable or scary, people turn to the messenger, the journalist, and expect us to choose a side, to take a stand. But that's not what we do. What we do is inform. We share all the information we have. We fact check. We call out lies or untruths. We ask the difficult questions of those in power that you all need the answers to. And we shed light on the way policy impacts people. And with that work, we arm the public with information. Now, if a bus is going off a cliff and the public has all the information and decides to let it go off the cliff, or maybe even work to make that bus go off the cliff faster, that bus will crash. Journalists will not save it. A society chooses what path they move along. They choose whether they go off the cliff or not. I don't protest.
I don't lobby policymakers or advocate for one particular point of view, but I do advocate for the truth. I do bear witness and work to fairly and accurately document realities on the ground, even when it's hard, unpopular, or dangerous. Now, I'm going to use quite the cliche, which is, a crime for writers and journalists, but whatever. Right now, as we speak, you all know this, we're living through a time in this country that is marked by deep division, polarization, hate, and threats to a free press. And that's not unique to the United States. Europe is living through the same phenomenon as illiberal leaders are being bolstered, as wars are fought for power, resource, revenge, and supremacy from Sudan to Ukraine to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. In these moments of deep unrest, division, anger, and violence, here's my cliche, get ready. The easiest way to discount the message and conceal the truth is to shoot the messenger, both figuratively and literally. Well, guess who the messenger is? It's journalists from big institutions like NPR, from our local stations, freelancers with no backing and protection from those institutions. They risk their lives at times and work tirelessly to bring the realities of this world and this country to your living room, your car radios, your phones. I'm assuming you only listen to us, so I'm not going to bring up any other. Do we journalists always get it exactly right? No. Does history sometimes tell a very different story with the benefit of hindsight and time? Yes. But we are here, especially in public media, on a mission to inform as best we can, with the facts as we know them. Sometimes those facts are concealed purposely, distorted in the fog of violence and lack of access, or by nefarious actors twisting the narrative to serve their goals. We try to sort through all that, bring you what can be vetted, tell you what we don't know, share with you who is doing what and why, and ask those in power the questions where the public, you, need answers. We do that without fear or favor, no matter the consequences, no matter the subject, and even if the work is just ignored. And sometimes the truth, it's hard to hear, especially for so many of us who have a clearly held worldview of how things are, how things should be, and who is good in our mind and who is bad. But often our worldviews are limited by our lived experiences and the information we have access to, whether by choice, censorship, or algorithms online that keep us in comfortable echo chambers. The thing is, simple stories that just have us nodding and agreeing, those are not the ones that challenge us to grow and to build. I think in the over 20 years I've been a journalist, what I've learned is it's easy to try and tie a story neatly up and choose a victim or a villain. But that story will most often be wrong. I spent a lot of my career covering conflict, revolutions, division, and in those moments you really get to see the beauty and the courage of human beings and what they're capable of, but also the cruelty and inhumanity of human beings and what they're capable of. A lot of that has to do with trying to survive our hardest moments and the stories we tell ourselves about and our leaders tell us about who we are helping and who we are hurting. After all, it's easier to dismiss truly awful things that humans do to each other by deciding someone in the equation is just less human, doesn't mourn their children the same way or value their life the same way. And it's a common tactic by those in power suppressing dissent, dehumanize the dissenter. But let me go back before I get to today to tell you about how I came to do this work, to host NPR's flagship morning news program, Morning Edition, and its companion, Up First, which I assume you all listen to, so I won't get into what you're missing if you don't. I was born in Saudi Arabia to a Lebanese-American dad who immigrated to the U.S. for an education and a better future. My dad hails from the Middle East, my mom from the Midwest. She's a Michigander, and she's very Midwest nice. They met at college at Western Michigan and ended up in Saudi Arabia for a good job that provided for our large family and my dad's extended family. He was one of 12 kids, and my mother and father brought them all to the United States when the Lebanese Civil War threatened to take their lives in the 1970s. So their future is here in the United States, their history and ancestry over there. And trying to feed 12 families and get them started in the U.S., it's pretty expensive. So my mother applied and reapplied for this job that my father ultimately got in Saudi Arabia, which is how he was able to educate us all and help his larger family get started here in the United States. It was a life-changing thing for my family. But I, as a child, didn't know any of that. I just knew I got to grow up in this country. I wasn't from Saudi Arabia, with other kids from all over the world who were also there because of job opportunities their parents got. So in my class of just 18 kids, we were 12 nationalities. So in this small town of Yanbu, Saudi Arabia, I was exposed to the world. I think it's what put me on this path of storytelling, of leaning into our differences rather than being afraid or threatened by them. And so I grew up around politics and world events and what violence and repressive or bad leadership does to a society that was the center of our universe always. And at first, I didn't know I would be someone who would end up documenting the same type of historic moments we lived through or would discuss at our dinner table. And like a lot of immigrant dads, my father really wanted me to be a doctor. And so I tried. At freshman year, I took biology. I barely passed. I realized science, not my thing. You're welcome. I've saved a lot of lives by not being a doctor. So I started searching for a new path. I had lived through these historic moments in the region, as I mentioned. During this time, so often I watched American media, the media from the country that I'm from, tell the stories of where I lived, and I didn't see myself. I didn't see our friends. I didn't see the families that I knew represented. There was something two-dimensional about the way that region was covered, the way Middle Easterners were covered, as if violence was somehow just inherent in the DNA. It was often divorced from the vibrancy of hospitality and food and music and love that I knew in this region. It was divorced from the history, where Europeans drew arbitrary borders and then left the Middle East and North Africa to deal with the aftermath of those decisions. So I decided to try and tell some of these missing stories, to fill in some of the blanks, which is why I really believe in diverse newsrooms, because those lived experiences mean these missing questions are being asked. I didn't know it would lead to NPR and Morning Edition. I didn't know I would cover the U.S. invasion of Iraq and its occupation, the wave of uprisings in the Middle East when people demanded better governance, representative governments, and an end to corruption. I didn't know I would cover the U.S. and the fault lines of race and identity, the grave threats to democracy here, to a free press, government overreach that has hurt citizens and civil liberties at times. But I knew I wanted the unseen, the unheard, to have a voice also. And I spent my career looking for those voices and putting them in stories for the world to hear, for the world to read, for the world to understand the humanity of people like them and people different from them. I truly started that work in Iraq, when at 24, I moved to cover a misguided, deadly war that the United States waged. And I remember landing in Baghdad. They would do a corkscrew landing to make sure that you don't get hit on the way down. And at first I thought, who sent me here? I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm also scared. And I was really afraid, but not really of the war around me. I was afraid that I would fail in truly telling the stories of Iraqis trying to survive regime change, the dismantling of their country, the societal division that came with that, and the civil war that was born from the U.S. war and occupation. The stories of the young soldiers carrying out these foreign policies and how that impacted them, their health, their lives, if they came home with those lives. And it was my job to make sure that these stories got back to the United States, to policymakers making decisions that would change people's lives forever, for Americans who were making decisions about who they wanted to lead them. I did that through people. The pregnant women who were inducing and scheduling cesareans so they wouldn't be caught on the dangerous roads of Baghdad after dark and shot by insurgents or U.S. forces who mistook their speeding vehicle for a threat. In the sectarian war, I documented the disillusion of a society as people were killed for their sect, religion, or ethnicity. Marriages were falling apart because the Sunni and Shia Iraqi were no longer safe in the same neighborhood. So the two Muslim sects were divorcing, and the society literally unraveling. I watched the greatest minds flee the country as sectarian militias and insurgents became the rulers of their neighborhoods. Before they left, they would burn their books in the backyard so they wouldn't be mistaken as collaborators with the Americans or collaborators of the so-called other side of a senseless civil war that devastated so many and empowered a select few. Much of that violence is gone, but the legacy of that occupation and war lives on, even as Baghdad has returned to a bustling capital that I hope to visit again soon. It was in Iraq that I learned the power of truth and what people would do to stop it. We became targets for what we wrote, who we were, but also for armed extremists angry at what the US was doing in Iraq. The walls between us and the people we were supposed to cover grew higher every day because we needed to live to tell the stories beyond the walls. From there, I moved to Egypt. I was tired. I thought nothing would happen there. And then 2 weeks before, protesters rose up and demanded that their autocratic leader leave. Those protests in 2011 were filled with hope. I remember a professor in his 50s weeping in Tahrir Square in the center of the city the day Hosni Mubarak, the longtime autocratic president at the time, stepped down. The professor's granddaughter was born that same day, and he said she would get to live in a free Egypt. Hold your head up high, he chanted with other protests. You are Egyptian. But when Mubarak stepped down, the unity dissolved, and counter-revolutionary forces took advantage of that moment. The military took control, a military leader came to power, and has successfully won less than fair elections ever since. And today things are stable, but more politically repressive than ever. The human rights activists I knew are under house arrest, in exile, or jailed. One, Ala Abdel Fattah, has been in prison for years. He's a British citizen, and his mother is currently on hunger strike, trying to bring attention to his case. His crimes were his thoughts, his ideals. And free and independent press in Egypt is seen as a threat to the status quo, and yet some still do it. And from Egypt, I covered a wave of revolts across the region. I think often of one woman I met in Libya. Her name was Selwa Boughairis. As her country was in the throes of an uprising against Muammar Gaddafi, the late dictator of the North African nation, I snuck across the border from Egypt and literally walked, into a Libya in chaos. Protesters had been killed, tortured, and detained for daring to dissent, so some of them took up arms to fight back, and militias formed along tribal, regional, and religious lines. In the midst of this chaos of people from all walks of life fighting for a free Libya, I watched this human rights lawyer who joined other lawyers and civil rights activists in the early days of the protest try to keep some type of law and normalcy in her hometown of Benghazi in eastern Libya as they fought a violent regime. She tried to keep seatbelt laws in place. She started weapons collection programs for those who weren't fighting, and a system of justice when suspected informants and prisoners of war were being taken and abused by rebels. She wanted to build civic institutions as they fought for change. She didn't want her side to become the monster they were fighting. For years, she stood for that Libya, the Libya she imagined could be real, a place where human rights were respected, where there was true justice and religious extremists with guns did not rule or take away choices from citizens. The last time I saw her in Libya's capital, Tripoli, she was involved in national reconciliation efforts to bridge the gap between warring parties, and she was hopeful just before parliamentary elections in 2014. In her mind, they were a step toward a democratic and stable country. And despite the dangers posed by armed religious extremists who didn't like an outspoken woman pushing her agenda, she went back to her hometown of Benghazi to vote because that was her right, and she had fought for it. But she didn't cast that ballot. She was assassinated in her living room, and her husband was disappeared. She was killed for her unwillingness to cede her vision because she refused to be quiet. Her voice posed a threat to those who disagreed with her, and so she lost her life. Now, this is not unique to faraway places that you may never visit. This is something that can happen anywhere. There is violence here, right at home. I mean, we saw it last night when someone killed 2 Israeli embassy employees in D.C. Seems to be politically and hate that motivated that. But it's beyond what we saw yesterday. There is a surge of illiberal forces here and in parts of Europe, and as I've seen and reported for years, countries divided and deeply polarized, like this one, create fertile ground for people who want to empower themselves rather than heal a nation. In the US, we also see threats of religious extremism in a country celebrated for its religious diversity and separation of church and state, its First Amendment rights, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to practice any religion or no religion, the freedom of speech. We see threats of political violence, largely from right-wing militias, but not exclusively, as we've seen with assassination attempts on this president during his campaign, and we document the way people are unwilling to listen to the other side as they deem their political opponents enemies to be smited. And the press that tries to cover all of this with context, fairness, and facts, well, what's the best way to discredit fact-based journalism? To shoot the messenger. Make the truth relative, push untruths like the election was stolen in 2020 so that clear facts suddenly become disputed, and then make the journalist the enemy. Shoot the messenger, keep the power. A trusted free press, diverse newsrooms, those are the cornerstones of any thriving democracy. Think about the power of information. It was this week 5 years ago that a video of a man named George Floyd being murdered went viral. A police officer had his knee on Floyd's neck as Floyd called out for his mother. That video was shot by a 17-year-old girl. It went viral everywhere on the internet and sparked an uprising, protests around the country and the world that led to local police reforms and national conversations on race, racism, and excessive use of force by law enforcement. Today, we're also seeing a backlash over the changes that were being demanded and the way that happened. Journalists have been there to cover it all. The video, the reaction, the reforms, the backlash, and the reversals. That's our job, to arm our citizens with information. We cover what's happening, what society is doing, where the fault lines are, and if changes are coming. And on the 5-year anniversary of Floyd's murder, my co-host Michelle Martin is there in Minneapolis revisiting that time and telling us the stories of what happened then and what is happening now. And I'm proud that at NPR, we work to bring on a diversity of voices that reflect what this nation really looks and sounds like. I'm proud of the accountability journalism, but also just introducing Americans to other Americans and citizens of other nations. These may be people you would otherwise never meet, never hear from. And it's a very dangerous time for journalists, literally dangerous. Last year was one of the deadliest for our industry because of what's happening in Gaza. The Committee to Protect Journalists has now documented that some 200 of our colleagues, journalists and media workers that do work like we do, that have been killed doing those jobs at a time where they are the only source of information because no international press is allowed into Gaza still all of this time later in this war. But at NPR, we are lucky enough to have a brave NPR producer, Anas Baba, who continues to document what is happening for us as he survives the war himself, and he does that with our bureau chief in Israel, Daniel Estrin. When I think about that particular conflict, I often think about two people I reported on and what it says about human nature and the breakdown of empathy. In 2023, just a few days after the Hamas attack on Israel, the single deadliest attack on Israel in its history, I flew in and found at the time we couldn't believe that the death toll at that point had gotten to 1,200 people, that armed men targeted military bases and civilians in their homes, young Israelis dancing at a music festival, and took hundreds of hostages, dozens still in Gaza. I visited a kibbutz on the border with Gaza, just, I want to say 4 days maybe after. I walked into 2 children's bedrooms. The mattresses were stained with blood. The town was eerily quiet. Everyone there had been killed or evacuated. And outside the gates of this kibbutz, a backhoe was sweeping up dead gunmen who had invaded this place. I found the home of survivor Don Alam, and I called him because the entire town had been evacuated as I looked at this burned out building that he had been in. He told me how he and his family hid in a safe room waiting for someone to come save them. For hours and hours, the Israeli military did not come. He and his family listened to gunfire, smelled their home burning, and when they finally emerged, his neighborhood was post-apocalyptic. The dead bodies of his neighbors and militants strewn the manicured lawns in the midst of rubble. I asked him who he blamed, and he said he didn't know. He just knew that they'd been slaughtered and that several people from his little village were now hostages. As for Gaza, he told me he didn't care what happened to anyone there other than the hostages. Shoot them all, he said. I don't care. Now, he said this not because he's some kind of inhumane person. He said this because he was traumatized. He was afraid. He was grieving. 23 years old. He wants to feel safe. And I heard that a lot in those early days. Raise Gaza, burn it, shoot them all. And from this man's kibbutz, I could hear the punishing Israeli response underway. The booms were outgoing, and the Palestinian death toll was also mounting. On that day, so early in this cycle of violence, already 2,700 people had been killed, 800 of them children. The borders were sealed at that point. No food, fuel, or water was being allowed in, much like the situation over the last 3 months. Today, that death toll is over 53,000. I also think of a young woman about the same age in Gaza named Schachtman, a Palestinian college student I've been speaking with since October. As bombs and artillery fire rained down in her neighborhood in Gaza, she would send me voice memos. As she was displaced once, twice, 3, and finally 8 times. She is likely being displaced again right now. She would tell me what it felt like to be lifted off the ground by the power of an airstrike, the dust that gets in your nose and ears. She would describe the life she lived before this all started. Her grandmother's rose garden, her house, the room she redecorated with her sister, and her university. She talked about her professors, her friends, her classroom, and her plan to build a computer on her own when she finally graduated. She so badly wants to go back to school. But that life for Schachtman is gone. Her neighborhood destroyed, her university now rubble, and she lives in a tent and tries to read what she can off her laptop when she can find a way to charge her computer. In her most recent voice memos, as she documents her own life for the world, the hope I used to hear in her voice is gone, and it's been replaced by something that is hard and is desperate. She wants the bombardments to stop. She wants her life back. She says it's slipping away like everything before was just a dream. And she, like Don Alam in that southern kibbutz in Israel, started speaking with anger about payback. Nothing, she told me, will be enough to pay back Israel for what she and the people around her are going through. Nothing will be enough. And I think of them both, almost the same age, both wanting a life that is safe and a future that is stable and free. One living under siege in Gaza for years, the other with sporadic rocket fire from Hamas in southern Israel until the October 7th attack that destroyed his community. Both traumatized, both speaking about revenge. On the day Alam was attacked, he had no power to stop it. He has no influence on Israel's response now, and Schachtman is also powerless to stop what she's living through. She has no influence over Hamas or the Israeli occupation and response. They're just surviving it and asking the world to listen to what they lived through and what they are still living through. Their security, their safety, their future is intrinsically linked. They are neighbors, living on the same piece of land and thirsting for a future that is better. But do they hear each other? Well, NPR listeners get to hear both of them. And beyond Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, we've done reporting across Lebanon, Egypt, in Syria, where a sea change has happened and a dictator is gone as a new and uncertain path emerges. And here at home, we are documenting a radical remaking of the federal government, often in legally questionable ways, as there are looming questions about whether the First Amendment, the right to free speech, is being respected and protected in this country. Our work in all these places is vital to give listeners a full picture of what is happening and how the decisions of those in power are impacting those they govern. If we don't have access, we can't provide a full picture. If we are barred from the Oval Office or an entire territory under siege, we cannot give a full picture. The public needs independent, fact-based journalism. We need the messengers. It's the only way to stay informed and stay empowered as citizens of this country and the world. So don't let anyone shoot the messenger, and don't expect journalism to stop a bus from going off a cliff. All we do is report the facts, investigate, ask the accountability questions. And NPR does that more deeply than most places because we are in your community, because we have incredible local stations covering your communities like WHQR. So I thank you for supporting the work, for listening to the work, and for wanting to be an informed citizen even when it's uncomfortable to hear truths that don't confirm your own worldview. Thank you so much.
Well, before we wrap up this episode, here's the question and answer session we did with Leila Fadel. You'll hear Rob Zappel, County Commissioner and member of the WHQR Board of Directors, asking the questions that we fielded from luncheon guests here.
First question comes from Richard at table number 1. As a student of language, I'm interested in the pronunciation of your family name. Your colleagues pronounce it to rhyme with coddle, but that's not how you say it. Can you give us a guide to how we can say it like you?
Okay, I get this question so much. I didn't even think about this. So when I first came to NPR, I thought about how to say my name because when my dad moved here, he ended up anglicizing it and saying Fadel so that people could say it. And I thought, oh, he might like if I pronounced our name correctly on air. And I did, and everybody's been like, how do you say your name for 12 years? So my last name has an Arabic word, da, in it. There's no N, it's not Falden, it's Falden. And I don't know how to tell other people how to say it, but coddle's not too far off, so I'm just like, that's fine. So, but it is a Lebanese, like an Arabic word that doesn't exist in the English language, I guess. And so it's harder, I think, on the ear for a lot of people to hear exactly how I'm saying it. So that's my answer.
Great. Our next question is from Shelley at table number 25. How do you ensure news coverage is balanced when it's easy to be outraged these days? How do we answer the accusation that public radio is biased or woke? Sorry.
No problem. You can't prove a negative, right? Like you can't put an Excel spreadsheet together and decide whether we're biased or not, because that's kind of a perception issue, depending on where you stand on the issues. I think what you can say is that we're fair and that we're fact-based, and that if you listen to us, it's not a bunch of people yelling and outraged. It's a bunch of people living and dealing with what life is. Some who are very happy with the situation right now, and some who are not at all. But sometimes facts can sound biased. If there are dozens of lawsuits under one administration and not that many under another, well, those are the facts. That is how the system is working right now, and we have to cover it all. I also don't think it's helpful to lean into hysteria as journalists, right? We just have to cover what's happening and also think about, because it's only a 2-hour show and there's so much news, what we should be covering and what we should be following through on. And so I don't spend that much time thinking about whether or not somebody thinks we're biased. I spend a lot of time thinking about, am I being fair? Are a plethora of voices being represented here? And I think about our coverage holistically. You're not going to listen to a 4-minute story and hear everything. You're going to hear a perspective or two. But if you listen to our coverage holistically, you will hear and see that we try. Some people won't come on our air, but we try and get everybody on there. But we will fact check. That is our job. That is not bias.
Yeah. Our next question is from Giles and Jean at table number 11. Where do you find your joy with all that's going on?
I like to say I eat my feelings. I was just eating cake at the at the table. I'm a big foodie. I love food. I think we actually think about that on the show too. We always try to include, and I'm sorry, there wasn't that much joy in my speech, but I do feel like people are so capable of the most amazing and the most awful things. And so on our show, I mean, I get it from movies and reading and food and travel, and I think our show does that for you too. Like, we take you to places, we bring you amazing authors and food, and so wherever we're working, even in the most crazy times, there will always be joy. I'll tell a quick story about the uprisings in Egypt. There was this particular day called the Day of Rage, and it was really scary, and we were in the Sinai area, and I was trying to get back to Cairo. I finally find a cab driver to take me. People are breaking out of prison. We get to Cairo, a bridge is on fire, nobody knows what's happening, and so the cab driver won't take us any further. So I get out of the cab, and a friend of mine, really my closest friend, we covered a lot of these things together, we just start walking to try to find a metro, because like during the revolution, everything stopped working, but the metro kept working in Cairo. So we're like going through the alleys, and there's a huge wedding in the alleyway, and a party, and people are dancing, And that's what brings me joy, because life will happen no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're living through. People will find a way to try to be happy.
Boy. That was a great answer. Yeah. The next question comes from John at table number 41. Who were your role models when starting out in your career?
I don't know if you guys will remember this journalist. His name was Anthony Shadid, and he was a 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper journalist. He was with the New York Times. He passed away in Syria from natural causes. He had an asthma attack. They were going on foot over the border. And the reason he was somebody I admire so much was that somehow he was so incredibly honest about humanity, and he broke through all of these labels of who is bad and who is good, and he just got to like the really hard decisions of being a person and making those decisions. And he covered the Iraq War pretty extensively and was very famous for it. He wrote a book called Night Draws Near, which I recommend, from those dispatches. And I just truly admired his ability to tell the human story and not to condescend to anybody and not to judge or write with judgment. And I would really recommend, I know he's been gone a long time, but I think about him a lot, because when something momentous happens, I think, how would Anthony cover this? And everybody covering the region with him, would wake up every morning being like, how did Anthony cover this? Because we knew we wouldn't do a good job like him. We're like, we're not going to be as good as him. But we all looked to him for that same sort of guidance. So he was my mentor.
Our next question is from Mary at table number 41. Can you tell us about your experience being arrested in Egypt?
So it happened to a lot of people that day. So this was during the uprising against Mubarak, and it was pretty clear that it was turning against him. And so he had sent a group of counter-protesters into the square. It was named, I think it was called the Camel Battle, because if you remember, if you're old enough to remember, which I think we all are here, there was a couple people from the pyramids, tourist tour guides that came in on a camel and a horse. And I was trying to figure out how many people had been hurt and killed that day. And so I was like, I'll just go to the morgue and ask. So I did. And I have, my Arabic sounds Lebanese. I was with a Palestinian journalist and an American, a blonde American photographer. And so we get to the morgue, and we ask the question, and they're like, who are you? And obviously we didn't get an answer, and we start walking away, and we get surrounded. In Cairo, a lot of the times they had these what they called boltagia, which translates to thugs. And so they were just people that would act on behalf of the government. I don't know if they're paid or whatever, but they're like, who are you, and why are you in this neighborhood? And then suddenly the military came, and we got detained and searched and handcuffed and blindfolded. And I was like, well, this is not good. And and I just I was like, okay, Egypt's a strategic ally. I'm with the Washington Post. This is not going to be a good PR thing. But it was such an unpredictable time. And when somebody in power is in danger, you don't know how they're going to act and what they might do to you. And then I'm in detention, and I was getting off. They take us on a military bus to this, I think it was a military intelligence headquarters, and I'm getting off the bus, and before they blindfold me, I see this guy I know who used to be a journalist. I don't know what he was doing there, but we made eye contact, and I was like, well, I hope he tells somebody. And I go into detention, and you realize they have arrested all kinds of just like random people. So there were teachers, random foreigners. So it was like some guy who was coming back, some like guy who clearly smoked a lot of pot, coming back from the Dahab, like a beach resort, in a poncho, and he was like, I don't know what happened. And so we're all in there, and then 17 hours later, we were released. And I was like, okay, well, that was fine. But then I found out my mom knew, and I was like, oh, no. So then I called, because she's like, yeah, she was scarier than maybe Mubarak sometimes. So I called her to make sure everything was okay, and then it was fine. But it was just scary because you didn't know what was going to happen. But then I didn't get detained again, so that was good.
Wow.
More historic because the reason I told you it was like I speak Lebanese Arabic is a rumor started that I was a Lebanese spy from Hezbollah, that I was with a German woman, the blonde woman I guess was the German spy, and then we were also with this Israeli who was the Palestinian, I guess. And so there was like this whole rumor. I was like, I'm just not going to go back to that area.
Wow. Our next question is from Kelly at table number 23. You've worked in both print and radio. Do you have any preference for one or the other, and why?
I do, obviously. Honestly, I love radio, and the reason I do is the intimacy of it. I think being able to, I feel like it's the best of both worlds. I feel like you can get distracted by pictures, and I feel like print can be beautiful, but you don't get to hear somebody. And even in a foreign language, you can hear joy and sadness and anger and all of those things. So I feel like it's the most intimate way to tell a story, and it still has, because we give stories space in public media, I feel like we still have space to give context, and so it's really my favorite medium. But a great TikTok in print, because you don't need sound, is pretty good. When like these historic moments and they rebuild it all, that's pretty good.
Our next question is from Beth at table number 19. What is your secret to getting up so early in the morning and being able to sound as smart as you are with everyone from leaders of countries to survivors of disasters? Yeah.
Well, that's kind. Thank you. I don't have I'm trying to figure it out still. I am like permanently jet lagged. I'm a natural night owl. I don't know what happened because now I get up at 2:30 a.m. But sometimes I'm like, great, I get into bed at 7:30, I'm asleep by 8:30, I wake up at 2:30, I'm good. And then some days I'm a disaster and I hope it doesn't show up on air. So I'm glad that it doesn't.
Wow, jeez. Our next question is from Kitty at table number 29. What is the last book that you read?
Oh. So the great part of this job is I have to read for it. It's like part of my job now. The last book I read was James Comey's FDR Drive, because I interviewed him yesterday, and that'll be on tomorrow. And I asked him a lot about seashells, and not that much about this book.
Our next question is from Nate at table number 28. First off, thank you. What is your favorite Tiny Desk concert experience at NPR? And what do you enjoy the most about reporting with NPR?
So this is bad, but I keep forgetting to go up there because they start right when I finish. And like the other day, Bad Bunny was there, and I didn't know, and I didn't go. And then all my colleagues were like, "Did you see Bad Bunny?" I was like, "No." I don't know what my favorite. I don't know. I have to think about that. And this was asked for me yesterday, and I also didn't have an answer. I've got to think about this. Sleep deprived. I can't remember.
Our next question comes from blank at table number blank. Oh. Yes. We'll call it anonymous. What is it like presenting to the number of people that you do? Mm-hmm.
I actually don't think about it. I mean, the amazing thing about radio is I'm not looking into a camera. I'm just kind of talking to I don't know who. And so I think about people I know when I do this, because I know there are if I think of millions of people, I'll freak out. Because I've always been kind of a shy person, which I had to get over, obviously. But I kind of think about my mom and my friends and and the people I know in the world and what they would ask or what they would think or what they would want, to stand in for all of you and hope that those are the questions and the things that you want to hear. So I just don't imagine how many people are listening. I only realize that when people are like, "I heard you this morning." I'm like, "You did? Okay."
Our next question is from Lee in table number 17. What is the future for investigative journalism? Wow. Yeah.
Hopefully a good one. It's the most important thing that we do. I think it depends on how long we can make it work. I mean, investigative journalism is expensive. You have to spend a long time on one project. You You have to be taken out of the daily news grind. You have to be able to request documents, to fact check, to travel to places, maybe to just knock on a door that will never be open to you. And so we have an investigative unit at NPR headquarters. I know a lot of our stations also spend time really focused on one particular issue that's important in their community, and they've won, in some cases, they've been cited for Pulitzers for that. You look at a place like ProPublica that does that pretty exclusively, and that is their mantra, and I think that is among the most important work we do for accountability journalism. So I think the future is as long as it can function, because it has to be supported to continue.
Our next question is from Danny at table number 40. Your job requires a lot of passion, commitment, time, skill. How do you find the balance? Do you have a practice that helps you disengage and avoid burning out? Oh, great question. Yeah.
That is, I think that's a really important question, because depending on what you cover, it all hits journalists at different times depending on what they cover. Your beat can seem really chill, and then all of a sudden it is the center issue of the moment, right? I wish I had a good answer. I've been trying to figure that out my whole life, my whole career, because it is hard it isn't a 9-to-5 job, and you really are plugged in all the time and trying to understand and think, and so I've been trying, on my days off, if I can, I actually do try to not look at the news until I need to prep for my next day. And now that I work, now that I'm a morning edition host, I know that I'm not going to host on a Saturday or Sunday. And so I have the luxury of, and that's not the same for all of our reporters. Daniel Estrin in Tel Aviv, if something happens on Saturday, he can't be like, it's Saturday, guys, I can't do it. He has to do it. And so I think it's just about really seizing the moments that you have and making those downtime and stepping away from the work and not obsessing. We can't control everything. We can only control what's in front of us and what we can do. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, is we can do the job that we have, which is to present to the world what the facts are. But obsessing over it does what? And so it's good to step away and have a hobby. But sometimes I do obsess, and I don't have boundaries.
Our next question and last question is from Sadie at table number 35. Do those in public broadcasting feel optimistic for the future?
Well, as the spokesperson for all of public media, I don't know. I will say I am. And it isn't, I have to tune out. There is supposed to be a wall, right, between how the work is funded and how the work is done. I do not think about where the money comes from. That is not my job. That is not my problem. My problem is doing the job that I'm tasked with, which is finding the facts and not worrying if I'm going to be defunded for telling the truth. That is not my job, and I don't care. I do care that we continue, but I don't care for that is not my job to think about that, and it's not what we're supposed to be thinking about, and it's why there is a firewall. And I think we've seen really dangerous things happen. Like, you look at what's happening at CBS with Sherry Redstone and the news leadership. That is very scary, because the wall is crumbling, the firewall. But I do have hope in public media, and I have this hope because of my colleagues, both at NPR headquarters and every single station that I meet, who are committed to the same values and have the same passion for what they do. And I'm also really hopeful because we have not fallen into the trap of a lot of corporate media, because we aren't beholden to one corporation that owns us. We are beholden to America. And you guys keep us accountable. And so, yeah.
You can't beat that. Yeah. Thank you all very much. Let's give it up for Leila.
All right, well, that's just about all the time we have for this edition of the Newsroom. My thanks to Leila Fadel, not just for being our guest on the show, but for spending time with the news team. It was a real pleasure. Thanks also to WHQR's program director, Ken Campbell, for technical assistance and for handling recording duties during our luncheon. Music for today's show was provided by If These Trees Could Talk and Blue Dot Sessions. If you have comments, concerns, or just an idea for a future show, email us at newsroom@whqr.org. I'm Ben Schachtman. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us for the next edition of the Newsroom.